On this episode of Doing the Most, we're making an Ethiopian mead called tej.
Homemade brews and various how-tos, everything from mead to roast, bake creation, fermentation, inebriation, doing the most.
Tej is unlike many fermented beverages, and from home to home, from shop to shop, it can vary quite a bit in flavor profile. Tej is typically consumed young. It's often slightly sweet, a little bit effervescent. It's got some lactic acid bacteria in there that create a little bit of a sourness. And it's made with a plant called gesho, which is a shrub. And usually that means using the leaves, but sometimes there are crushed up stems in there as well. And of course, it uses honey because it is a mead. On the internet, you will see people argue that it's perfectly okay and normal for tej to grow mold. And I'm here to tell you that it's not. And we've got a whole video on why you shouldn't drink drinks that have grown mold. This mold myth is a little bit pervasive. I've seen it in videos, I've seen it in forum posts, and it's just not a thing. There shouldn't be mold in tej. There should be yeast and there should be bacteria. And this seems to be some kind of misconception around where the microbes come from that ferment the tej. And if you look at the research, it's clear that they come from the containers that they're fermenting in, as well as natural microbes in the honey. There are actually several peer-reviewed studies where microbiologists have gone out in the field, taken samples of tej, brought it back to the lab, and tested it for what microbes they find still present in the tej. And like I said, it's mostly some yeast and acid-creating bacteria. And we have analogs for that here. In this video, we're actually going to be introducing a pretty robust bacterial culture to this tej to give it just a little bit of funk. More on that in a bit. Now, I've not been to Ethiopia, so I can't give a first-hand experience. I can just tell you what I've seen in the literature, and that mostly indicates that tej is made with gesho leaves. Sometimes the crushed up stems will be in there. Sometimes they'll use the stems for smoking the pot that they're going to ferment it in. However, from what I've read, gesho leaves seem to be the common denominator ingredient when we're talking about gesho. Now, we tried it with the twigs, and that didn't even make it to bottling because it kind of tasted and smelled like fermented yard waste. It smelled like rotting wood. And my theory behind that is that the gesho twigs that you can get online are probably not very fresh. They've probably been in those bags for a while, and I think a lot of the flavor compounds that may be in there probably broke down during that time. However, the gesho leaves seem to preserve really well, and we really enjoy them in this beverage. Now, like I said, usually it's the natural microbes in the honey or in the fermentation pot that are doing the fermentation of tej. And if you look at this flowchart from one of the studies I found, it's relatively clear that that's where the microbes come from in a traditional tej making practice. As you can see here, the gesho is actually boiled before it's introduced to the other ingredients in the must. And we're going to replicate that using modern mead making practices by using yeast that's been cultivated for making wine and by introducing a bacterial culture. So having studied the literature, I threw out basically everything I thought I knew about making tej and decided to just get back to the basics based on the processes and practices that I saw in the literature. So our recipe for this video is very simple, but we've tested it a few times to make sure that it's excellent. And it includes gesho, water, yeast, honey, and of course, a little bit of bacteria. And that's going to come in the form of a yogurt culture. So let's take a look at our ingredients list. The ingredients for our tej recipe are 6 pounds of alfalfa honey, 50 grams of boiled gesho leaves, spring water to 5 gallons, 1/4 cup of Greek yogurt, and EC 1118 yeast. We will also be back sweetening with 12 ounces of erythritol and bottle conditioning with priming sugar. This recipe begins with boiling some water. I'm using a 7-quart Dutch oven for this and adding in 1 gallon of water. Next, we will be adding our gesho. Here, I'm just using the gesho leaves. So important to note here, I got this bag of gesho leaves on Amazon, and the price was fine. It was like $15 for this bag, which for a 5-gallon batch is not too bad. However, on Amazon it was marked as a 4-ounce bag, and it's definitely a 2-ounce bag because I weighed it. 2 ounces is just slightly more than 50 grams, and 50 grams is what you need for this recipe. So you can probably trust the link in the description that you're gonna get 50 grams. You're gonna get the amount that you need for this recipe, but I feel like it's important to give a disclaimer that it's definitely mismarked because I ordered this gesho a few times and every time it was 2 ounces, not 4 ounces that arrived. I should probably leave a review about that. And those leaves go directly in as we bring our water up to a boil. Stir, stir, stir. And the lid goes on. I just want to cut in here to remind you the reason we're boiling the gesho is because we want to control what microbes are in our brew. So anything that's carried on that gesho, we want to obliterate before we add it to the mead, because we're going to be introducing our own yeast and our own bacteria to this. We don't want anything wild making its way in there. Just as that comes up to a rolling boil, we will cut the heat and allow that to cool to room temperature. Next, our honey goes in. Here I'm using alfalfa honey, which is a nice neutral but rich honey. You wouldn't want to use something too intense like a buckwheat honey, but a nice light neutral honey works really well in this. I tried it with both alfalfa honey and orange blossom honey. Next, our boiled gesho goes in. That's all the liquid and all the leaves. It's good to have a nice wide mouth funnel for this. Using a sanitized spatula, I pushed everything through, and then we simply top that up to 5 gallons. Stir, stir, stir. Our starting gravity is just around 1.049. So the big important thing that we added to put a little bit of bacteria in here is yogurt. It's live active culture yogurt, and it's just enough to get a little bit of a bacterial colony in there. And then we add the EC1118 yeast, which is a nice, clean, and aggressive yeast that kind of finishes everything off before the bacterial culture can go too wild, creating that funkiness. We found that this amount of yogurt with a 1-day lead time ahead of pitching the yeast was just enough to give plenty of funkiness, but not something that's gonna kind of wallop your palate with funk. Now that is to say, if you bottled this pet nat style, rather than waiting for it to finish fermentation, you're gonna get a lot more funk forward drink because there's less time conditioning for that funky, kind of musty, kombucha-y kind of flavor to calm down. So that 3 to 4 weeks in the bottle as it's bottle conditioning is actually kind of important to mellow out the funky tones and allow the other more delicate gesho flavors to rise to the surface. Here's the yogurt we're using. You can see this one has all the active cultures listed on the back. And that's just a 1/4 cup of yogurt going right in. And we'll try and make sure we get the liquid in first. No need to stir it up. And then just top that off roughly to a 1/4 cup. That goes right into primary. Make sure you get it all in there. Shake, shake, shake. And those bacterial cultures will get to work adding a little bit of sourness and a little bit of funkiness to this mead. Don't worry about those chunks. "24 hours later, while having a beer, we are going to add our yeast. I tried this with a funkier yeast previously called Javaru, which is a Lithuanian farmhouse ale yeast, but taste testers agreed that it added just a little too much funk to this tej. So we're using EC1118 here because it gives a nice clean ferment that complements the funk from the bacterial culture as well. That farmhouse ale yeast gave it a real punchy funk that was just a little bit too much for a lot of folks. And then 24 hours after that, we are front loading with 10 grams of Fermade O, and this will be all the nutrient that goes in here. 2 weeks later, it's done fermenting, still in primary, and we're going to bottle. On bottling, we are back sweetening with erythritol, which is a non-fermentable sweetener that tastes very similar to sugar, and that will allow us to have a slightly sweet tej in the bottle. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, tej is often slightly sweet, and I think that's a product primarily of the fact that it is consumed young, so there's still residual sugar left over in there. But using modern mead making practices to get an effervescence and some sweetness, we used a non-fermentable sweetener called erythritol in order to achieve that sweetness. Because we didn't want to put you in a situation where you have the chance of making bottle bombs by using all fermentable sugars. If you want your tej to be dry, you can skip the erythritol, or if you want it to be a little bit drier, you can try adding a little bit less. We went all the way down to a 1/4 pound of erythritol in a 5-gallon batch. And while it was nice and refreshing and crisp, it was probably a little drier than most folks would want. Then I'm adding 4 ounces of cane sugar, which will add some nice sparkle to this as it bottle conditions in the bottle. You can also use dextrose or honey for priming. Just be sure to use a priming sugar calculator. To our erythritol and our sugar, I am adding 1 cup of water. We're going to turn this into a syrup so that way it mixes well throughout. Just pop that into a microwave for a couple of minutes. Then bring it out, stir, stir, stir. And if needed, you can microwave it again. You'll know it's well combined when it turns crystal clear. We're going to get a clean rack out of primary to make sure that we don't suck up any gesho leaves or any of the lees at the bottom of that primary carboy. Halfway through, we're going to add our syrup mixture. This is just because it was very hot coming out of the microwave, so I wanted to make sure that it didn't thermal shock our carboy. So we're going to pour it directly into this gallon of must that we have racked off in the bottom of this carboy. Then as we finish racking that off, everything will mix nice and thoroughly. So racking tube goes back in, and we open the flow back up to finish racking. And then we moved directly to bottling, and this filled about 4 dozen bottles. So this was the recipe and process for our tej after all the experimentation and various batches that we did to get to this point. And what we landed on was something that is slightly sweet, it's effervescent, and can be consumed young. Generally, you can have this packaged and carbonated within about a month of having pitched your yeast. And there's no other stuff in there other than the yeast nutrient that we added to give the yeast a little boost along the way. That yogurt culture that we added gives it a nice touch of sourness, a little bit of funkiness, so we didn't have to do anything to play with the acid profile. And I think you get a nice round tannin out of those gesho leaves. So for the final tasting for this, I had a special friend in town and I wanted to have her come and do a tasting of the tej with me. And so here's Faye of Faywood Mead tasting our final batch of tej. So I tried this with the sticks and it was gross. So
Okay.
my version only uses the leaves.
I thought that it had sticks in it. This is pretty. Look at that.
Yeah, so this is bottle conditioned, and it's back sweetened with erythritol.
Okay. That's very pretty.
It looks like mead.
It does. It's very meaty.
Nice light sparkle.
The carbonation's really nice on it. Ooh, it smells good.
Yeah, I felt like the gesho kind of was like almost like a green tea or an herbal tea kind of.
Yeah.
And on the bag, when you bite it, actually describes it as like beer brewing hops, even though it's very much not a hop, it's a leaf.
So interesting. I like it.
Yeah?
Yeah, I do actually. It does have that weird, like, I don't know what it is. A funkiness. Mm-hmm. It's just that, like, I always want to say like a musk, sort of.
Yeah, there's a fermentation funk. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting, when you drink this fresh, like if you bottle it pet nat style, so it's carbonated in like 2-3 days, that funk is real strong.
Ooh.
But this batch here, this has been in the bottle about a month, and so something goes on during that month of conditioning that kind of smooths it out a little bit.
Yeah.
But it's still there.
But it's still there.
And I kind of like it.
I do too. It's sort of like an herbally soda. Like, it's just so light, and it's I mean, it's crisp. It's nice.
It's super refreshing.
Yeah.
It's super refreshing, but still funky, and not funky in like a kombucha sense, but like in a
Oh, it is kind of kombucha-y.
like a little bit, but it doesn't have as much of that sour twang.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. Maybe that's the word I was trying to think of, is kombucha.
Would you want any more or any less of that gesho flavor, or do you think it kind of hits that sweet spot?
I think it's really nice where it is, to be honest, because it's very mild. And I think it just makes it a little bit easier to drink. Like I could just just drink it, you know, and it's really nice. And it's gosh, because the one that I had from the meadery, I mean, it was very strong, and I had like a little sample of it, and I was like, yo, that's enough for me. Like I was not the biggest fan of it. The funk was very strong.
Interesting.
Yeah, whereas this is nice, light, crisp. I don't even remember if it was sparkling either. I think it might have been still, maybe. Yeah, but that funk was like, I was like, oh, this is Tej. I like this much more than the one that I had. I'm just gonna say that.
I'll take that.
This is very nice. I like this.
Well, Faywood Mead, thank you for visiting.
Hey, thank you.
This is such a surprise treat to have you in the Doing the Most studio. You can check out her channel. It's exactly what I just said, Faywood Mead. And subscribe to her. Congratulations on surpassing 1,000 subscribers.
Thank you.
Freaking killing it over there.
Very exciting.
She's got a lot of fun stuff, great aesthetic. So check her channel out, subscribe to her right now. Actually, just don't even finish this video, just go over there and subscribe to her channel. But if you're still here after all that, you can follow us on all the things and join our Discord server. You're on our Discord server.
I am.
And subscribe to our channel too. And we do weekly videos here. So enjoy your Tej, however you choose to make it.
Yes.
I prefer this version.
This is nice. I would follow this recipe. Because you know it's good. Cheers.
Cheers.
Tink.
That was loud.
It was.